If your blood runs orange and blue, this is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it, New York.
Oh, are things getting interesting in the association? EJ Stewart here. Tommy Beer is here. This is Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast. Audacy, WFAN original podcast you can get wherever you get podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you hit that auto download feature on your streaming service. You can get these episodes every time we drop. We got plenty to get to on this episode. There's a massive trade that has gone down in the NBA. Bradley Beal leaving Washington. If you listen to this podcast, you know it is good news that he's not coming to New York. You don't have to worry about that. He is going to Phoenix in a trade involving Chris Paul, involving Landry Shamet, and some pick swaps. We'll talk about that and particularly how it impacts the Knicks. I think it impacts the Knicks on multiple fronts. We'll break that down in a bit. Also, Julius Randle opens up. It's rare you hear Julius Randle do really sit down interviews, but he actually did a long 2-hour interview. I listened to all of it on the podcast P with Paul George. He talked a lot about not just his time with the Knicks, but also his career and his life coming up. So I want to touch on some of the things he talked about from the Knicks standpoint, what it meant to play for Tibbs, what's his relationship been like with Jalen Brunson, where he sees the team at this point in time. Very interesting comments from Randall, so we'll talk about that as well. And you may have forgot, but it's draft week. It is NBA draft week, which a lot of NBA draft aficionados like myself, very exciting. Not very exciting this year for Knicks fans for many reasons. One being that they do not have a pick. That's really probably the main reason. Knicks do not have a pick in this year's draft. But we will still talk about what storylines to follow, what to expect from the Knicks, and if there are any players maybe we should be looking at if the Knicks decide to buy a pick at a certain point in time. So plenty to get to on this show. Tommy, again, joins me as always. Tommy, how you feeling?
Feeling good. Always something going on in the association. You know, people ask like, oh, if NBA finals are over, you get to relax now for a little bit. I'm like, nah. Nope. We got the draft this week. We got free agency on the horizon and summer league not too shortly after that. So plenty to discuss, including a blockbuster deal that you're right. I think does impact the Knicks on a few different fronts. So let's chat about the Beal blockbuster.
Let's get to it. So, again, this is Orange and Blue Bloods New York Knicks podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Hit that auto download feature on your streaming service. Also, check us out on YouTube. You can find us on the WFAN channel and the Audacy Sports channel. So, let's begin with the first big domino that has fallen this offseason. It could have some big implications for the Knicks. The Suns have acquired 3-time All-Star Bradley Beal along with Isaiah Todd, Jordan Goodwin in exchange for Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, several first-round pick swaps, and second-round picks. Bradley Beal now joins Kevin Durant and Devin Booker to form a new Big Three out in Phoenix. So that's out there in the West Coast. What's going on here with the Knicks, and how does it impact the Knicks? Well, it impacts them potentially on two fronts. Number one, Chris Paul has been linked to the Knicks. We talked about that a bunch on this podcast. He was sent out in this deal, obviously, to Washington. The report was that they actually wouldn't mind keeping him around if he wants to stay around, but knowing that he probably won't, they are currently looking for a third team willing to take on Chris Paul's contract, which is the final year left on his deal, and get involved in this and make this a 3-team trade. Apparently, the Warriors and the Clippers are the teams rumored to maybe be interested in making this a 3-team trade. So Chris Paul, Knicks front there, affected with Washington now coming into the picture with Chris Paul now headed there for now. Now, number two for the Knicks. The Knicks own Washington's first-round pick next year that is top 12 protected. If that pick isn't outside the top 8 by 2016, it turns into 2 second-round picks. So when you have the Wizards moving on from Bradley Beal, expected to hit the tank button, and you're the Knicks, you have lottery-protected pick coming to you. Now you got 3 years here, where you got to find a way to land yourself outside that top 8 at some point in time if you want to find a way to get that pick. Otherwise, it turned into second rounder. So that's maybe even bigger implications for the Knicks. So I'll start right there, Tommy, when it comes to that trade that the Knicks made, which happened on draft night last year, where they drafted Ousmane Dieng, and then they made a million different trades. One of those trades, which was the OKC trade, brought this Wizards pick to the Knicks. It was among 3 picks that came over. Does this trade that the Wizards made now worsen the value of the Knicks pick? That is, again, top 12 protected this year. That goes to top 10 in 2025, and then top 8 in 2026.
Yeah, I think you have to acknowledge the fact that obviously this trade in and of itself weakens the value of the pick, but then you just assume that this is the first domino, as you mentioned, and kind of the first, the first sign that the Wizards are going to hit the reset button. Will they, if KP opts into the final year of his deal, they probably trade Porzingis this offseason. Kuzma is probably not long for DC, based on, does he want to play with a team in a full rebuild? Again, they're gonna search out assets. They're gonna trade. They're gonna, kind of strip the car of all its parts and sell whatever they can, whatever's not tied down, and try to get future draft picks back. And obviously, they're not going to go hit free agency and spend a bunch of money on win now veterans. So I would be shocked if the Wizards, again, as EJ noted, top 12 protected next year, 2024, top 10 protected in 2025 if it doesn't convey, and then 2026 top 8. So I'd be shocked if the Wizards don't have one of the 11, 12 worst records in the NBA next season. I'd be very surprised if they don't have one of the 10 worst records in the NBA in the 24-25 campaign. 2025-26 is a bit of a different story. One, it's only top 8 protected, so that obviously gives the Knicks a little bit more leeway. Plus, it's really difficult to predict what could happen 2-3 years from now. Let's say the Wiz hit on a draft pick on one of the draft picks this year. Right? We've seen great players slide to 11, 12, 14, 16. Maybe they consolidate some picks and move up and get a real difference maker this year or next year. And at that point, in 2025, 2026, then you can start to build some assets around there. They hit on 2 draft picks, and you could be 15 games under 500 and still finish with the 8th worst record in the NBA, and then fall to 9th or 10th. In the lottery, if a team 9 or 10 jumps up. We saw the Blazers jump all the way up to 3 this year. So it can happen. What I say, there's probably at this stage of the game, maybe 50-50, whatever Vegas put the odds on, probably a better chance that it conveys the 2 second rounders than the Knicks get a lottery pick, which is unfortunate, but it's the reality when you deal with kind of these protected picks. But make no mistake, it wasn't great to see. We expected it. We kind of had a feeling it was going to happen, and it makes sense certainly from the Wizards' perspective. But it's not great news for that protected pick from the Knicks.
Yes, definitely not great news when it comes to the value of that Wizards pick that the Knicks acquired in last year's trade.
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
So, it's not so good. I think if Leon Rose is thinking about shopping that pick around, if you remember a lot of the conversation regarding the Donovan Mitchell trade, it became a lot of the conversation being, well, can the Knicks include some of these protected picks in replacing some of these unprotected picks that Danny Ainge had wanted in a trade with Utah? It wasn't working out well back then. So imagine now trying to trade a pick from a team that looks like it's heading right towards the bottom of the standing for the next some odd years and saying, well, it's top 10, 12, 10, and then 8 protected. Chance might be slim, quite frankly, that the Knicks end up getting that and getting that pick. Now, I think you're right that I think the last year, once you get 3 years removed from where we are today, they could draft an incredible player next year, and all of a sudden, maybe in 2 years they're not so bad. Maybe they're still a lottery team, but not a team that's looking for a top 2 or 3 pick. But that was probably one of the downsides to whenever Washington decided to hit that tank button with Bradley Beal and with where they are right now, because you knew with the way the protections were that the Knicks would probably be hurt with that. So not great news, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's something to go crazy about. But it was a tough blow, I think, to kind of see where this team is and look at so much of the rest of the players that are on that team. Like you mentioned Porzingis and you mentioned Kyle Kuzma, and say their futures are very, very much in flux as well. It doesn't look very good in terms of the Wizards being a competitive team for the next few years.
Yeah, definitely. Again, the other thing to mention and keep in perspective is that the Knicks may not be worrying about that pick by 2026 if they wrap
Sure.
that pick into a larger deal. And but again, to your point, even if the Knicks don't hold on to it, a team trading for it has to. The reality is that pick may not convey it. Essentially, it may lead to 2 second rounders, which is obviously minimal value.
Yeah, exactly. Now, on the other side of this, you have the Chris Paul situation. So again, Chris Paul said he learned about this while on a plane from his son. His son texted him saying, "Hey, I think you're getting traded, Dad," which is quite the way, I guess, for a Father's Day gift I guess you get from your son, or around that time that you learn that you're being traded while on a plane to New York to push a book that he's putting out. I think it's not an autobiography. I think it's about a lot. It's about his grandfather. And he learns that he's been traded. So the Knicks were one of the teams that were rumored to be in on Chris Paul. At least that's what Adrian Wojnarowski said. I said in this podcast, I thought the momentum was swinging that maybe he would actually be a New York Knick. How does this complicate the potential Chris Paul sweepstakes that's about to ensue in what's probably happening right now, quite frankly?
Yeah, I thought the best case scenario from a Knicks perspective would have been the Suns stretching and waving CP3 and then him becoming a free agent. I think once we get into the trade scenarios, and it sounds like the Clippers are looking at, are talking with the Wizards already. And again, this Beal trade hasn't been officially consummated because they're trying to rope in a third team to benefit the Wizards and ship. And so Chris Paul's not going to play for the Wizards next season. So the question is, can the Wizards flip him immediately as basically as part of this larger trade expanded out? If that doesn't happen, they'll keep him. And then look to, flip him in a separate deal for other assets. Maybe, I assume they could hold on to him. The start of the season, he'll get a couple months off and then try to trade him again at the deadline. So yeah, the odds of Chris Paul ending up in New York probably took a little bit of a ding. But I certainly wouldn't rule it out. But from a Knicks perspective, I always thought the most likely scenario was him becoming a free agent, accepting a backup role, playing 18, 20, 22 minutes a night for the mid-level exception around 12 million. It seems like that's less likely as of Monday morning, Sunday night, whenever, when the trade was announced.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that, the Knicks, they can't entertain a 3-team deal. I mean, there's no reason to trade valuable assets for Chris Paul. I've said, I've made the case. I think Chris Paul could contribute and could be a valuable piece to the Knicks next season. But I don't think it should be at the cost of young players currently on the team or at the cost of future draft capital that could then be used, that could be used as another trade for a star. Like, that can't be where the Knicks are here. So I think that you can't entertain a 3-team trade. You got to hope that Washington basically strikes out and can't find a third team, which I don't think is out of the realm of possibility. I mean, it doesn't seem like these teams are lining up to say, hey, we'll give a lot of assets. I mean, this trade has been announced for days now.
Yep.
And no one has stepped up to the plate. They know we will fork over whatever Washington is looking for Chris Paul. So that tells me that maybe it's going to end up being a dry kind of trademark of Chris Paul after all. But Washington has the benefit of, if the Clippers and the Warriors are interested, they do have that carrot of saying, look, we can dangle this and kind of make this a little bit of a bidding war. And maybe not giving up much, but maybe one of those teams will say, you know what? All right, we really don't want to lose Chris Paul out to one of these other teams. We'll give the future first to get him here. That's the game. That's the game of chicken that Washington is playing, which they should. This is how a smart organization moves, and we'll see how that goes. I think that there is no chance the Knicks entertain a 3-team trade. Do you think Chris Paul gets traded, or do you think he ends up getting cut?
I think he'll eventually get traded. I think other teams are waiting, again, like the Knicks, waiting it out. Obviously, would prefer to sign him for $12 million instead of trading for a 30 player on a $30 million contract. Again, we've talked about the implications. The Suns obviously are, the Phoenix second aprons is what teams are going to be called. Because they're up over 170 million, basically with just 4 players. So, that's the situation they're locked into. And other teams obviously would prefer to sign, get Chris Paul on an affordable veteran contract as opposed to the $30 million that he's owed. And one other thing before we switch gears, in terms of how this trade could impact the Knicks, I'd be lying if I didn't say, I wonder if we look back 3 years from now that this was the trade that eventually led to Devin Booker demanding a trade from Phoenix because Kevin Durant is, who knows, injury prone, doesn't work out. Beal struggles. He's not worth the money. And Devin Booker looks up in 25, 2026, something along those lines and says, my path to a championship is really, really difficult here. I got an aging 36, 37-year-old KD. Beal's not the player he once was. Ayton has never developed. Maybe I envision myself in a different scenario. And then obviously we know about the Kentucky connections. We know about the CAA connections. Could that lead to a Devin Booker landing in New York scenario? Obviously far down the road. The Suns are their Suns hope that and listen, they have a legit chance to win a championship next season and continue to be a competitive team. I'm skeptical of this whole thing working out, but hey, I mean, you got one of the best players of all time in KD. Devin Booker's a stud. Beal's a really talented player, overpaid, but he's been injury prone. If he can stay on the floor, maybe this lights a fire under Ayton, or they flip Ayton for multiple pieces and depth, etc. So they'll be one of the 5 odds-on favorites to come out of the West to win a championship. But again, looking down the road, this has big upside. It also has really drastic, disastrous downside, and that could benefit the Knicks someday in the future.
Look, I know you said that the Suns will have, potentially top 5, top 6 odds to win a championship. I know who won't be putting money down on that team. EJ Stewart. Because I'm looking at a roster that has 5 guys currently under contract. 5. And you talk about a team that's already well above the salary cap, well above the luxury tax. I mean, I think it's interesting that Chris Paul, in his interview with the New York Times, talking about the Knicks connection, he said that it was not just Matt Ishbia who wanted a different direction. He kept mentioning Isaiah Thomas, and he mentioned Isaiah Thomas like twice, 3 times. He wanted to make sure everybody knew that Isaiah Thomas is also involved with how the Suns are currently being built right now. And I don't feel great about a team that has 5 guys currently on the contract completely capped out. And I don't know how they're going to fill a whole roster. I mean, I'm looking at their salary cap situation. A lot of these guys that are going to be free agents, they don't even have their bird rights. They don't have Damian Lee's bird rights. They don't have Giles Gahogie's bird rights. They don't have Terrence Ross's bird rights. They don't have TJ Warren's bird rights. How do they bring these guys back? Are these guys going to all just take the absolute, minimum salary like they played under this past season? Like, I can't imagine all those guys got to take that. Some of those guys should be able to make a little bit more money than that. I mean, I don't know. We talk about Devin Booker in maybe a couple of years. I don't think this is going to work. I mean, they don't have a point guard. Like right now, the only point guard is, one of the few guys on the roster. Technically, is campaign with who they have to guarantee, which I'm sure they will now that they lost Chris Paul. I don't feel great about how this team is built right now. And that's besides the fact, Beal and Booker playing in the same. Are they playing the same backcourt? Is Booker moving to 3? Like, I don't know. This just feels like NBA 2K GMing at its worst. Like in NBA 2K, maybe this would have worked out, but to actually just attribute that to actual roster building, I think this is going to end up being really, really bad.
Yeah, when the Suns made the Kevin Durant trade, and we talked about how it impacts the Knicks, the Nets control the Suns draft basically from now on through 2029. So they got to be really happy with the I shouldn't say that, but they have a reason to believe that that trade could really benefit them.
Yeah.
2027 unprotected first rounder, 2029 unprotected first rounder, 2028 option to swap unprotected. So there are a lot of reasons for Nets fans to be excited because you can argue that they should win 50 plus games next season. But after that, things could get ugly, and that's when the Nets could really benefit. But yes, as far as contracts go, they're going to sign, the Jack Lockdales and those type of guys. It sounds like they're going to sign them. And again, with the second apron, they kind of skirted that issue by getting the trade done prior to the end of the 23-24 season.
Right, exactly.
We'll have some flexibility this year, but the following year, really restrictive in terms of they don't have ability to use their exceptions. They can't consolidate contracts and trade. They can't send out cash and trades. So it's going to be very difficult to round out that roster.
Yeah, good luck to Ishbia and Isaiah Thomas for fielding a 15-man roster.
Yep.
Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, DeAndre Ayton, Devin Booker, all making, just doing this quick math here, like 100, looks like 150 million next year. Like, I mean, this is insane, kind of what they put together. But we will see how that shakes out. But shifting gears back to the Knicks, Julius Randle opening up about the direction of the team, his chemistry with Jalen Brunson, and what it is like playing in New York. He was on the Podcast P show with Paul George. During the show, he talked about how he loves playing in New York and that he's received a lot of love despite some of the perceptions, maybe suggesting that maybe it hasn't been so fun playing in New York.
Negativity that's coming towards y'all.
First thing first, if you want like a lesson, don't do thumbs down. That didn't work out well for me. Honestly, I love it, bro. It's made me the player I am today. It all depends on how you look at it, bro. It can be tough for some people, and it's been tough for me. It's been tough for my family. The Garden it's a different animal. It done taught me so much more about myself and as a player. Age you though, bro. It's like almost being like you the president, and they go in there and you see them and they look great, and 4 years later they got the image and they look old as hell. Yeah, that's how I feel right now. How is it in New York? If you look at it from a media perspective, you'd be like, damn, it's hard being there. I go on walks all the time, like around the city. The actual fans interaction, like face to face, is crazy how much love it is, bro. Yeah. We ain't won shit. You know what I mean? We got to the second round. They like, man, they so appreciative.
So Julius Randle there talking about how it's like playing in New York. I thought it was funny. He mentioned the thumbs down thing. Said that was probably not the best thing you should do, which I kind of enjoyed that he was able to make fun of that in the full podcast. That was a edited clip that the Podcast Piece show put on Twitter. In the full clip of that segment, he said that, he attributed that to actually immaturity, which I thought was, interesting. I never heard Julius Randle be that introspective about his issues. So I thought that was interesting. I also thought it was interesting him talking about where the Knicks are in terms of how much they've realized that perhaps they're not as far off as maybe people would have thought, or even they would have thought. Here was Julius Randle on that.
From a team standpoint, I had to say it just show you like how balanced the league is, right? Mm-hmm. To where we realize, man, like just keep getting better. We not that far off. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And that's motivating for me in a sense, because like I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, all right, how can I be the best version of myself to help the team win? Mm-hmm. So I go into the offseason, you dissect that. But it's everybody from a team. Like we got a great mixture of talent, bro. We got young dudes, we got, guys who, going into their prime. So we got a great mixture of guys, but it's like, how do you keep getting better? Right. So from a team standpoint, I think that's where we at. Like as individuals, how can we get better? And then we figure out, what worked in the postseason, what didn't. Like what worked versus Miami, what didn't. Mm-hmm. What are the teams doing that won? So like I look at Denver and I'm like, all right, what are they doing as a team to help them have such great chemistry on the court? Right. To win.
So interesting thoughts from Julius Randle on where the Knicks are, his experience playing in New York. I'm not sure how much you got to hear about this interview, Tommy, but from anything you heard, anything stand out to you from the Randle interview on the Podcast P podcast with Paul George?
Yeah, nothing crazy, but like you said, I thought it was beneficial for him. I thought it was good for him to, self-deprecating, had a little bit of a sense of humor, was playful about the thumbs down thing, gave some insight to kind of how he felt. Both emotionally and physically. It's one of those things where, listen, players don't owe the media anything. But other than to speak with the media is part of their contract, but I just think there's a lot more to be gained, and certain players take advantage of this. This is a fine line. The media is going to asks for too much, and they will stab you in the back, and they'll run with a quote disparaging you if it'll sell papers and all that stuff, and we get it. But I do think there is a benefit to developing a cordial relationship, a friendly relationship, as opposed to an adversarial relationship. And the Knicks have been kings of that. Not obviously not making personnel available. Leon Rose hasn't spoken to anyone other than an MSG representative in a couple of years. Dolan never goes on record other than to say something crazy. Teams are of all the teams in the NBA, they're arguably the least media friendly. Which doesn't benefit them. beat writers get upset and a select number of fans. Most fans don't care, nor should they. It's not the reason the Knicks haven't won a lot of games, but it doesn't help the overall picture. And there's just not a lot to be gained by it. So you'd think at some point they'd learn their lesson and kind of revamp the way they handle it. But again, orders come from the top down, and when you have someone as petty as Dolan at the making all the main decisions, that it's not going to change anytime soon. But it was good to hear Randle kind of more free outside of the restrictive Knicks PR bubble. So I found it at least informative and a bit entertaining on that respect.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I feel like I listened to this and watched some of it, on the video side of it as well, and it made me wish the Knicks were more free-flowing in terms of letting guys talk to the media, do interviews, things like that. But it kind of made me wish Randle himself maybe put himself out there a little bit more. I mean, he is an all-star, he is an all-NBA player. You would think that, if he wants to talk to somebody, he could, move some boulders to get, his personality out there. Because I think that there is this perception that he is this kind of cold, this kind of like standoffish guy, which some of the media members who cover him, I saw Steve Popper said it on Knicks Film School, said that Randle's a pretty great guy. I mean, like he's a nice guy, he's kind, and a lot of people, when people think about him, you'd be surprised when you actually sit down and talk to him. And it was ironic that this interview then came out like the following week. And yeah, he seems like a cool dude. He clearly loves balls. It was interesting to hear him talk about the game the way he did. It made me wish that we kind of saw more of this side from him. New York's a pressure cooker, and what is being asked of him probably doesn't maybe warrant that as much. But I do wish that maybe we could see more of this from him. And I ended up enjoying a lot of this interview. I'll be honest. When it started and 3-4 minutes in, he's saying how he doesn't watch film. I did want to just rip my headphones off, but then he clarified that he is now watching film. He talked about how earlier in his career he really didn't watch too much film. It actually started during the lockout or not the lockout season, the COVID season. Prior to that, with the shutdown happening, he couldn't play basketball, couldn't go to any gyms. So that, required him to find another way to improve his game. And that's when he started watching a lot of film. He said I had the best year of my career at that point. So he says that this injury, he actually thinks will maybe help him, because right now, of course, he has the ankle surgery. He talked about that and the difficult recovery process that goes into rehab. He has said that essentially, now that I can't go and work out, because normally I would be out there working out right now. Now all I have is film. So I do hope that maybe him kind of studying the film will maybe help him see where he, struggles at times and some of the issues we've seen and we've talked about plenty on this show. I did think there was one thing, because we talked about the relationship he had with Tom Thibodeau, and I thought this was an interesting quote. I want to hear what you have to say about this, Tommy, because both of us have sometimes been dumbfounded as to what is this relationship with Tibbs and why does it seem like Tibbs is unable to hold him accountable. I think he said something in this interview that actually made me kind of maybe understand the relationship better. Here's Julius Randle on the relationship with Tibbs.
We related off the bat just because we both workers. Like, I don't know if y'all hear about like Tibbs, but like Tibbs be in the office all day, bro.
I hear that. He's a hard worker.
Yeah, so it's like, bro, you can't be watching that much basketball, dog. Why are you here all day? But like Tibbs really be in the office all day. And I'm like the type of dude that, practice, and then I'm coming back at night. And like I'm coming back at night, he's still there. So like he just like, I think he appreciated that about me, and I appreciate that about him. Like, he willing to put in the work. So I think like off the bat, like we hit it off in that aspect of our relationship. And then like I said, bro, like he just he the type of dude that like what to expect like every day. Like what's the expectation. And I think that creates accountability, within our team. So.
So I thought it was interesting because he ended with the accountability part, which is ironic because we always talk about Tibbs. It feels like not holding him accountable, at least not in public. And the way he plays, sometimes you wonder, is he holding him accountable in private? But Randle mentioning, Tommy, that like they hit it off immediately because Tibbs saw how hard he worked. It almost makes me wonder if that is why Tibbs gives him so much rope and why we don't hear Tibbs go after him. Because maybe Randle is the hardest working guy on the team. Like, if and by all accounts, like he he did the whole article he did in the no, not the Athletic, the Players Tribune. We talked about he goes to different cities, immediately goes to a gym because that's what Kobe taught him to do. There are some very funny stories about Kobe Bryant in this podcast that if you don't care anything about Randle's and Knicks stuff, or you're just tired of him, at least go to the end of it and listen to Kobe stuff. But that stuff was awesome. But anyway, like, I do wonder if Tibbs looks at him and says, well, I know how hard this guy works. I know the work he puts in. Like, who am I to say, okay, he should have dove after that loose ball, or he should have had, better body language. Like, he's given 10 times more effort than everybody else on the team. Like, do you think that may be why we see the relationship that him and Randle have? Like, I thought that quote was a little telling, to me at least, especially when he went back to the accountability part, because I think he kind of tied those two things together.
Yeah, it's clear these guys have a mutual respect for each other. And I think he alluded to probably the greatest strength that Tom Thibodeau brings to the table when you hire him as your head coach of your organization. Not a terrific X's and O's guy. He's gotten better as he's gotten better. He's a better offensive coach than he was a few years ago. And there's the other downside of playing guys too much and stubbornly, rigid, and how long can guys get berated before they kind of tune the coach out. All that other stuff is valid, and we'll talk about it. And we've talked about it, and we'll talk about it in the future. But that kind of is the crux of the real value of having Tom Thibodeau around your team and as the focal point, as the head coach of your basketball club, because some guys talk about doing, committing and showing up on days off and putting in extra hours and being the first one in and the last one to leave. Tibbs lives that life. Anybody that's played for him recognizes that. He doesn't ask you to put in more time than he does himself, etc. So I think there's a mutual connection there. But the Randle stuff and just kind of putting a bow on this conversation and the Randle picture at large is, and you mentioned the Players Tribune article that was in towards the end of that first All-NBA season when, Knicks fans were in love with Julius Randle and raving about him as an MVP, MVP chance every time he went to the free throw line and took the Knicks back to the playoffs. And again, he was Prince of the City. But then we have the next year when he just, the body language was terrible and the thumbs down and and then we came
and
up.
The play was terrible.
And
he had a terrible season.
Incredibly inefficient. And then he comes back the next year and plays at a really high level, but then towards the end of last season kind of went back that. So I think there's a lot of stuff going on there, and it's very easy to root for Randle when he's in that kind of positive space and everything's kind of going in the right direction. But then things kind of tend to tilt the other way, and when they start, unraveling that direction, it gets difficult to kind of get everything back on track. And that's where folks would hope that the head coach would hold the player accountable. And again, and as you said, we just don't see it. He doesn't say it publicly. That doesn't tell us what he does behind closed doors. But the fact that his minutes, per game are never impacted. The fact that he's never, taken out of a game and after a lack of effort play. So those are the things that are frustrating because fans love to hear this stuff about Kobe and they desperately want a Kobe type figure. But those same fans can't help but wonder, what would Kobe, and you talk about on the podcast, yelling soft to Sharman and Kobe cursing out his teammates. What on earth would Kobe say to somebody when the team's leading scorer sat at half court like this after a bad turnover in a playoff game? Like, what would Kobe say? Those are the questions I wished that he would kind of be asked on these type of salute, and I'd be fascinated to hear his answer. When you look at tape, do you see yourself and get mad at infuriated that you allowed yourself to let your emotions take over where it looks like you don't care on the court? Because we know that you do, because for from game 1 to game 77 out there every night putting his heart and soul on. People think he's kind of a bad guy and he's not a softie and a good dad because he's so mean and vicious and a brute force, but that's the type of effort and intensity he plays with. But then there's other times where you just don't see it. So that's the dichotomy of Julius Randle, and as we've discussed, one of the more difficult to characterize, like difficult to peg athletes in New York and in modern sports history.
And Randle's relationship with the fans, and he says, it could be hard being at the Garden when things are bad, or being outside of, the real world. I think he's referring to the internet, maybe people tweeting at him or Instagramming him. He talks about his family, so maybe people talk about his family. Then, in the real world, is all love. I think that some of that is, I think people, when they see Julius, they do kind of have a better understanding because they're not watching him in that moment turn them all over, whatever. Understand this is a guy who's averaging 25 and 10. He's led Knicks to the playoffs 2 out of the last 3 years. There is going to be a support. Like if I saw Julius Randle on the street, I show him love. I'm not going to be out there saying, "Oh, that's that guy." Like get him out of my face. He's also 6'9", 250.
Yeah,
so I don't think some of these people that are talking crazy to him on Twitter, they're not going to be saying that to his face.
That's the kind of the most important point as far as that's concerned. There's a lot of Twitter tough guys that see anybody, and just will tweet things to get a reaction, desperate for reaction, but then will give you a big hug and ask for a selfie if they see it, if they saw him in person. So. Yeah,
but at the same time, it's like I think Knicks fans also are just tired of like the roller coaster. Like you mentioned everything you talked about. Like it's he's great, and in the playoffs, he struggles. And he comes back and he has this weird season where he's ineffective completely as a player on the court, and he's just terrible teammate. Then he comes back. He says, "I'm gonna smile more." And then during regular season, for like most of the season, he was great. And then at the end of the season, he started acting kind of crazy again. And then he got hurt. Then he came back and had a great game one. He's like, all right, maybe Julius Randle has overcome this. And then he gets hurt again. And then he can't buy a basket against the Heat when they mattered most. And then he's giving bad body language. And then he's not hustling. It's like it's just this roller coaster with him. Where I think if he talks about New York being so crazy, and it is, and no one's going to deny that. But I think in some ways, like the Julius Randle experience not being so up and down would also make like his life a lot easier, make the Knicks fans' life a lot easier. Everybody would be a lot more happy if we just get consistent effort from Julius Randle. But nonetheless, shout outs to Julius. Shout out to Paul George for doing this interview. He's actually become a pretty good podcaster. I enjoyed this conversation. I seen clips of his other shows, so want to give him a shout out as well. So very interesting comments from Mr. Julius Randle. But we will finish the show here because, as I said at the top, it may have snuck up on some of you, but the NBA draft is this Thursday. That's probably because some Knicks fans are like, I haven't heard anything about any players coming here. I haven't heard any rumors about who may be drafting. Well, that's because you have no picks. The Knicks do not have a draft pick coming into this draft this Thursday. They traded their first round pick in the Josh Hart trade. That was their own first round pick that went out to Portland. The Dallas pick that they thought they were going to get, that was much hullabalooed, didn't happen because of the tanking that happened at the end of the season. So the Knicks can't come into this draft now. No picks. They didn't have any second round picks coming into this year. They traded like 30 of them last year in those various trades that happened to get out of some of those bad contracts, Alec Burks and Kemba Walker. So no picks, but it doesn't mean it won't be a fun night. It always is a fun night for the NBA. The Spurs have the #1 overall pick and are expected to take a Frenchman, Victor Wembanyama, and this is usually kind of the true start of the offseason. Of course, we have the June 30th, July 1st ordeal, but this is kind of when trades start to happen, movement starts to happen. You have to hear some rumors about maybe where some of these guys who are free agents will sign. Not a big free agent class this year, but this is really kind of begins like the true start of the offseason, the NBA draft. So what storylines, Knicks or non-Knicks, are you looking forward to following this week as we head into we're in the middle of draft week?
Yeah, I think obviously the top of the draft is interesting after the Wembanyama pick, after the Spurs take him off the board, and in the days leading up to that, we had there's a lot of smoke starting to billow out of New Orleans. You may have seen it when you were down there this past week.
Yeah.
Around that Zion talk where they're trying to move up to number 2 or 3 to get Scoot Henderson. And then obviously the Blazers with with the 3rd overall pick. It sounds like Dame's going to be upset if they take a young player as opposed to trading that pick for a win now talent. Or does Dame get shipped out to Miami and then the Blazers keep that pick and kind of build rebuild the team that way. So I think it'll be fascinating with those 2 and 3. And then assuming that order stays the same, or even if it gets flipped around, does Miller go 2? Does Scoot Henderson go 3? Looks like Amen Thompson has really been, making a charge and kind of solidifying his spot at number 4. So let me ask you, EJ, am I wrong to think that Miller's it seems like Miller's the kind of the consensus second best player in the draft right now. I shouldn't say that consensus, but maybe 60-40 among mocks.
Probably more. Yes, probably more fair. Yeah,
somewhere along those lines. Is that because I think if you would have polled those same, those same folks 6 months ago, it would have said, obviously Wembanyama 1, and then Henderson 2, and then some other guys 3, 4, 5. Has Henderson's stock fallen a little bit, or has Miller's stock risen a little bit, or how would you? Where do you stand on that?
I really feel like with the Scoot thing, because it's so funny, and Tommy asked me because I do so much draft content. I actually posted a new video. Check it out. New Generation Media did some stock rising and falling in this year's draft, so very apropos for this conversation. I feel like Scoot, in the discussion about him maybe falling from 2 to 3 in terms of where the top players lie, it has little to do with him and even little to do with Brandon Miller. And I say that because I think Brandon Miller is talented, but I think people have seen, there's another option to pick a guy that's not a 6'1" guard. And I think that's just really enticed people. Like, I think Brandon Miller has a lot of talent. The guy to be that tall, to shoot the way he can, the in space athleticism. I'm not sure he's as great an athlete, through context people think, but in space, great athlete. Like, you see these, raw tools, and you're saying, well, I've seen this guy succeed in the draft, this archetype succeed in draft way more recently than the 6'1", 6'2" guard. And regardless of how Scoot looks, I think people are afraid of that because there have been so many small guards over the past 10, 15 years who look like they would come in and be great, but it's just their size inhibits them. They're playing the toughest position to play in the NBA, maybe the toughest position to play in sports outside of quarterback in the NFL. It's NBA point guard right now. And it's just buyer beware every time you're drafting that point guard that high. So I almost feel like the Brandon Miller love has more to do with where the NBA is and there being any alternative to drafting a small guard, which I know a lot of NBA draft aficionados are afraid of sometimes.
Amen Thompson, do you think he's secured at the 4 spot, and you think he belongs there?
Yeah, I mean, I think he does. He's 4 on my board. I just think the draft, when you talk about those other options, Cam Whitmore, really explosive athlete, but on the smaller side. He's about 6'6", 6'5".
Do you have
he might play some 2.
Do you have Whitmore 5?
I'd probably have Jarvis Walker 5.
Okay.
I'd have Walker 5 from Houston. Another undersized forward, but he's 6'8". A little different. Strong, physical, plays both sides of the court. And then I actually would probably put Taylor Hendricks ahead of Whitmore there too. I love Hendricks. Hendricks is one of my favorite players this draft. Slight, needs to get in the weight room, but hell of a shooter at 6'10". Can defend the rim. Actually reminds me a lot of Jaren Jackson at Michigan State. So I think he's kind of a guy that's gone a little under the radar. So I love Taylor Hendricks, and I probably put him right there below there.
Knicks obviously no picks going into as of this moment, and probably won't once the draft starts. But we know they will keep an eye out, and they've had tremendous success drafting late in the first round. IQ 25th, Grimes 25th, Mitch Robinson early 30s. Is there a player that you would, is there a favorite of yours that should we see a tweet, Knicks are poking around for mid-20s, early 20s, late 20s, even early second? Is there a player that you hope they target just because, not even necessarily positional fit, but you think a guy that could slip in the draft and is undervalued at the moment?
I'll tell you what, I think that my brother mentioned him in one of our videos recently, and I do like him a lot. Is another Alabama player, Noah Clowney. He's a 6'10", stretch 4. If Obi Toppin is not going to be in the future of this team, and there's a report from Bondi today that Toppin may have expressed that he's unhappy with his role at some point, and that he's tried to keep that out of the press. So if you are looking for an Obi Toppin replacement, this kid's not the athlete Obi Toppin is, but he'll come in probably as a better shooter. So I think he's a good fit. Knicks are a weird team because they have so many guys who are young, who are already in the rotation. So you're looking at guys saying, who's somebody that can come in and play right away. You're looking for guys who can maybe shoot the ball, maybe a Julian Strother from Gonzaga, just another guy who can shoot from 25, 35 feet. He's got a limited range, as a lot of people learned in the tournament. We hit that game-winning 3 against UCLA. Maybe getting a shooter is someone with somewhere they can go. Knicks are kind of at a weird spot, though. They have kind of a solidified rotation. So I feel like any rookie they get, similar to Trevor Keels, who they picked up last year, I feel like any rookie they get, they may be looking towards a guy who's on the younger side, who they can just kind of like develop for 2 or 3 years and see if he becomes something. or if one of these guys ends up having to get traded in a big superstar trade, that they have a young guy that they've been developing that can come in and step in at that point. So yeah, those are some guys I think I would look at, but it's a weird draft. It's not a deep draft. Like I think it's really, 1 through 3 is a certain tier. Then I think it's weird. I think 4 to like 11, I think they're all kind of not that dissimilar. And then I think there's a pretty big drop off from there. I think Chris Murray's another guy who's really good too. I don't know if the Knicks would ever entertain that, but again, if you're looking for Obi Top replacement, I think he's one of the more underrated players in this draft. So those would be some of the guys I list. Jet Howard, also from Michigan. He's DeJuan Howard's son, another radar shooter. So those are the names I would think of if you're talking about guys who may go in the 20s.
Jaquez Jr. out of UCLA's.
Oh yeah, Jaime Jaquez. Yeah, he's good. Yeah, I like how me and brother was talking about him the other day. Like, he's one of those guys where I think you wonder what position he plays. Like, is he a small forward? He kind of plays power forward.
He's just a basketball player.
Exactly.
I like those guys that Draymond Green. What was he going to be? He's a pretty good passer, but he's a tough as nails, defender, leader, veteran. He's plug and play right away. Experience on the college level, big games. So he's one guy.
I really like Jaquez. My one thing about him when I talked about him earlier this week was I'm not sure. Because the adjustment from the college line and 3-point line is so big. And a lot of people don't realize that when you're looking at these players. When you watch Jaquez and the threes he takes, he's right at that line. And he takes a lot of mid-range jump shots, a lot of contested twos. Like, he needs to be able to actually be a true stretch 3. And, like, can he consistently make that NBA 3? That's my only question mark about him, other than the age and the positional thing. But I like his game. He's a guy that I would take a flyer on definitely in the second round. Maybe late in the first.
And I like him just because his floor is higher. Like his ceiling is not as high as these other guys. If he hits a 3, then, if he can be a league average 35, 36, 37% 3-point shooter, that changes the game. But even if not, I think there's a place for a guy. And last question for you. Knicks obviously don't have the 10th pick or 11th pick, wherever they might wind up. Do you think the Mavs, mocks have him taken, your guy Hendricks, Lively, Grady Dick floating around there? Who would you be most upset that the Knicks could have got that guy if the Mavs take this dude at 10?
Oh, Hendricks. And when this whole situation was coming down with this pick, I'd been circling Hendricks for a long time. As much as I love Obi, I was like, if they can get Hendricks, Obi becomes very expendable at that point. And he's probably he's probably on a more correct timeline with when Julius Randle's contract would come up, that he could then become the starting power forward. So if Dallas comes away with Taylor Hendricks, I love the shooter with Luka passes the rock and find open guys. I mean, that would be a scary thing potentially. I think that he has a lot of upside. I know they've been looking for a 5-man for a long time. So Lively is a guy who's been finally rising up these draft boards. Like, I mean, he was a little lower because of the season he had at Duke, but he's a great athlete. And I think that some of his struggles have to do with Duke not really having the best pass first point guards, guys who can get him easy passes. I think playing in the NBA, he'll actually get much better looks than he got in college. And he's already an impact defender. The guy is probably the best shot blocker in this draft. Compare him a little bit to Walker Kessler, who had a great season this year for the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, it's just sometimes those guys with kind of a limited offensive game have trouble transitioning. But again, if you know your role and you can solidify a team, that backline of defense, there's definitely value there.
Yeah, if the Knicks do find themselves in the second round, one of my favorite second round players this year, Kobe Brown from Missouri. Remember the name. Okay. You talk about Draymond Green, similar body type, kind of similar game, forward who thinks he can play point, maybe a little turnover prone, but really productive player. I think he's a guy that I would be very interested in watching. Also, Amari Bailey from UCLA, very impressed with how he played in the combine. That's going to do it, though, for this edition of Orange and Blue Bloods. Thank you guys so much for checking us out. Tommy, let the people know where they can find you.
One last question. Amani Bates, is he worth a late round flyer?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm very strong. Like, not like super high that he's going to be some superstar, but his shot making, like, you can't teach that. So you got to take a shot on him. I mean, maybe he won't work out. The guy has no athleticism. He's not that strong. But that shot is something that's special. So, yes, you got to take a shot on him.
At Tommy Beer on Twitter.
You can find me, EJ_Stewart, Action EJ on Instagram and TikTok. Again, thank you guys so much for checking out this episode of Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast you can find wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you get the auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes. Every time we drop 2 times a week during the offseason. So we will be back post-draft to give you guys an update on what has happened with the Knicks and the rest of the teams in the NBA. So make sure you follow us there. Also, make sure you catch us on YouTube as well. Check out the WFAN and the Audacy Sports channel and search us there. You'll find us on both. That's going to do it for now. Thank you so much for checking us out. For Tommy, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest podcast ventures. Links will be in the descriptions. And as always, thanks for watching, and we will see you in our next video.